Good morning, Nigeria, and a beautiful day to you all. Welcome to today's newspaper review. Let's start with the Guardian newspaper. Gubernatorial candidates, parties unsettled by running mate hurdles. You can find that story on the page 6 of the newspaper. On the top of the newspaper, 9 million lack access to HIV treatment as new infection rise, says WHO. WHO has said that they have 9 million lack of access HIV treatments as the infection rises. On the top of the newspaper too, you can still see Tinubu orders manhunt as northern elders decry fresh killings in region. You can find that story on the page 3 of the newspaper. On the bottom of the newspaper, opposition hails ruling as appeal court voice deregistration restores ADC 4 and 4 orders. Opposition hails ruling as appeal court voice deregistration restores ADC and 4 orders. You can find that story on the page 6 of the newspaper. Still on the bottom of the newspaper, federal government to spend 46 billion naira on Kano Airport runway reconstruction. Federal government to spend 46 billion naira on Kano Airport runway reconstruction. You can find that on the page 30 of the newspaper. Moving away from that newspaper to the Daily Sun newspaper. Tinubu talks tough on Kaduna killings. Tinubu talks tough on Kaduna killings. You can find that on page 4 of the newspaper. On the top of the newspaper, Oyo receives 2 surveillance aircraft to boost security. You can find that story on the page 5 on the newspaper. Still on the newspaper, Atiku celebrates as appeal court voice order the registration ADC and 4 other parties. Atiku celebrates as appeal court voice order the registration ADC and 4 other parties. You can find that story, the full story, on page 6 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, Wike welcomes Fubara back to Rainbow Coalition. Wike welcomes Fubara back to Rainbow Coalition. You can find that story on page 26 of the newspaper. Still on the bottom of the newspaper, for 76 hours after Sunday Sun report, Ubasani succumbs to pressure, picks Christian running mates. You can find that story on page 26 of the newspaper. Moving away from that newspaper to the Daily Independent newspaper. Nigeria's net liabilities hit $90.2 billion amid foreign capital boom. Nigeria's net liabilities hit $90.2 billion amid foreign capital boom. You can find that story on page 29 of the newspaper. On the top of the newspaper, Tinubu orders manhunt after 30 killed in Kaduna community. President Tinubu has ordered manhunt after 30 people have been killed in Kaduna community. You can find this full story on page 7 on the Daily Independent newspaper. Still at the top of the newspaper, herdsmen kill 16 persons in fresh Benue community attack. Herdsmen killed 6 persons in fresh Benue community attack. You can find the full story on page 6 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, Atiku, Udeze, lawyers hail appeal court ruling, halting the registration of ADC and others. Atiku, Udeze, lawyers hail appeal court ruling, halting the registration of ADC and others. You can find that on page 29 of the newspaper. Moving away from that newspaper to the Vanguard newspaper. The registration of ADC, others, was judicial rascality. The registration of ADC, others, was judicial rascality, said by appeal court. You can find the full story on page 5 of that newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, Nigeria loses 46% of dollar millionaires, retains 4th position in Africa. Nigeria has lost 46% of dollar millionaires and retains the 4th position in Africa. You can find the full story on page 20 of that newspaper. Still at the top of the newspaper, Nigeria at war. Tinubu has no strategy to end it, said by Olawepo Hashim. Nigeria is at war and Tinubu has no strategy to end it. You can find the full story on page 9 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, Nigeria demands justice compensation after Afrophobic attack. Nigeria demands justice compensation after Afrophobic attack, said by federal government. You can find that on page 37 of the newspaper. Still other newspaper, at the bottom of the newspaper, gunmen kill army colonel in Abuja and shoots wife. Gunmen killed army colonel in Abuja and shoots wife. You can find that full story on page 6 of the newspaper. Moving away from that newspaper to the New Telegraph newspaper. Southern Middle Belt leaders insist on South retaining presidency. Concerning 2027 presidential election, Southern Middle Belt leaders insist on South retaining presidency. You can find the full story on page 5 of that newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, ex-World Bank president worried over Nigeria's borrowing strategy. Ex-World Bank president is worried over Nigeria's borrowing strategy. You can find the full story on 25 of that newspaper. Still at the top of the newspaper, growing e-payment channels, deep H 1.22 check transaction, 17% to 1.42 trillion. You can still find that on page 4 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, hunts down perpetrators of Kaduna attack. Tinubu orders security operative. Tinubu has ordered for the hunt down of perpetrators of Kaduna attack. You can find the full story on page 2 and page 29 of that newspaper. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, appeal court set aside judgment ordering ADC, accord parties orders the registration. You can find that on page 4 and page 27 of the newspaper. Moving away from that newspaper to the Daily Trust newspaper. Relief for ADC as appeal court slams judge. Relief for ADC as appeal court slams judge. You can find that on page 3 and page 4 of that newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, ex-local government chairman returns to tailoring after losing seat. Ex-local government chairman returns to tailoring after losing seat. You can find that full story on page 6 of the newspaper. Still at the top of the newspaper, colonel killed while resisting kidnappers in Abuja. Colonel killed while resisting kidnappers in Abuja. You can find that on page 8 of the newspaper. And at the bottom of that newspaper, how Unijust student was lynched over alleged phone theft. How Unijust student was lynched over alleged phone theft. You can find that full story on page 5 of the newspaper of how a Unijust student was accused wrongly for stealing a phone. Moving away from that newspaper to the last newspaper for the day, the Matrix newspaper. Tinubu to Catholic bishops. Prosperity on the horizon. We will crush terrorism. Tinubu has said to Catholic bishops that he's going to crush terrorism, he's going to bring an end to terrorism. You can find the full story on page 3 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, Nigeria, Benin, Cameroon, custom unveils new border reforms agenda. Nigeria, Benin, Cameroon, custom unveils new border reforms agenda. You can find the full story on page 3 of the newspaper. Still on the newspaper, opposition hails Court of Appeal judgments. Opposition has hailed the Court of Appeal judgment. You can find the full story on page 2 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, Burna Boy cuts me off over false affair with his girlfriend's rumor. Said by Shatawale. You can find the full story on page 23 of the newspaper. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, UEFA UKPM slams FIFA World Cup investment plan. You can find the full story on page 25 of the newspaper. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, Makinde receives 2 surveillance aircraft to boost security. Makinde has received 2 surveillance aircraft to boost security. You can find that on page 3 of the newspaper. We've come to the end of today's newspaper review. Please stay tuned with us and we will see you soon. I'm Chimejim Okoro.